To start, I thought we should establish what an electrical potential is as well as an electrical current. Electrical potential is a difference between the concentration of charged particles between one point and another. An electrical current is a flow or movement of charged particles from one point to another. Electrical potentials and electrical currents play out at a neuron's plasma membrane. The fluid outside the plasma membrane, also known as the extracellular fluid or ECF, has a significant positive charge to it. The fluid on the inside of the plasma membrane, also known as the intracellular fluid or ICF, has a negative charge to it. The ECF has an abundance of sodium ions which carry a positive charge. The ICF has an abundance of potassium ions which carry a positive charge. However, there are also negatively charged cellular proteins in the ICF which cancel out the positive charge of the potassium ions. The plasma membrane has sodium-potassium pumps that use ATP to actively transport sodium ions out of the intracellular fluid and potassium ions into the intracellular fluid, allowing for the concentrations of sodium and potassium in the ECF and ICF as previously mentioned. The actual value of the electrical potential of the plasma membrane when it's at rest and capable of and ready to send a signal down its length is known as the resting membrane potential. A resting membrane potential has an intracellular value of negative 70 millivolts. When the resting membrane potential has been established, the membrane is said to be in a polarized state. Stimulation via chemicals, light, changes in temperature, or pressure cause a disruption of the plasma membrane's resting membrane potential. This is also known as an electrical current. The local potential is when there is a stimulus at the dendrite that causes an opening of sodium gates and diffusion of sodium ions into the intracellular fluid. This causes neighboring sodium gates to open as well, and if the stimulation is strong enough, it can progress through the plasma membrane of the soma and possibly to the axon hillock region. The positive shift in membrane potential caused by the influx of sodium ions is called depolarization. Local potentials have three characteristics. Local potentials are graded, which means they can vary in magnitude depending on the strength of the stimulus. The greater the stimulus, the more sodium channels open. Local potentials are decremental, which means that the current gets weaker the farther away from the site of stimulation it gets. And finally, local potentials are reversible, which means that if the stimulation stops, the membrane will return to its resting membrane potential. This is a result of the sodium gates closing due to lack of stimulation, which leads to the sodium pumps returning sodium to the extracellular fluid. If you have a keen ear, you may have heard me mention that if a stimulation is strong enough, it can progress through the plasma membrane of the soma or the axon hillock region. And if you did hear that, you are probably thinking, so what? Who cares? No big deal. Well, you're wrong. It's a big deal. The axon hillock and axons beyond have 7 times the number of sodium and potassium gates as dendrites and soma do. If that local potential is strong enough to reach the axon hillock, it can trigger a much more dramatic change in polarity and the membrane potential. The stronger, more rapid disturbance is called an action potential. For a local potential to be strong enough to create an action potential, it must be strong enough to cause enough sodium gates in the hillock to open and the membrane potential to reach the threshold for creating an action potential, negative 55 millivolts. Sodium gates open, reaches negative 55 millivolts. Once the threshold has been reached, the abundant sodium gates in the membrane of the hillock open rapidly, and sodium ions diffuse from the extracellular fluid to the intracellular fluid. This causes rapid depolarization, and the value of the intracellular fluid, or ICF, goes from negative 55 millivolts through 0 millivolts and up to positive 35 millivolts, peak value of the action potential. Once positive 35 millivolts has been reached, the sodium gates close, and the potassium gates open. Potassium ions then diffuse from the intracellular fluid to the extracellular fluid. This repolarizes the membrane back to its negative state. Once the membrane has returned to negative 70 millivolts, the potassium gates close. With the sodium and potassium gates closed, the potassium pumps are able to return cations to their original locations, allowing the membrane to recover and be ready to do this all over again. Action potentials are different from local potentials in a few ways. First, they follow the all or none law. If the local potential that reaches the hillock is strong enough to trigger an action potential, it will occur at full strength. If the local potential was not strong enough, no action potential occurs. Second, they are non-decremental. Action potentials maintain their full strength down the entire length of the axon, regardless of distance. And third, action potentials are irreversible. Once an action potential starts, it cannot be stopped.